Hi there, I'm Mary Susie from Bead Me a Story, and in this video I'm going to show you a new technique that I developed. This week I'm focusing with these chains on using Miyuki spacer beads, okay, and these beads have a very large hole to them, so I'm trying a new technique where I'm using French Bouillon on the ends in a very simple knotting technique to start a little gemstone strip. Okay, and that gemstone strip, once created, you can just use this in a bracelet. But the idea is to mix up your media. So this is going to be the simple bead stringing portion of that. And then as you can see in this longer chain, I've done seed bead sections connected with, this is a kit that I have available at beadmeastory.com, and this is a chainmail section. And then this is going to also attach to another wire section that is a separate video, and I'll show you how to wire these and make little wire wraps and links and link them together using chainmail. So this section is just this beaded portion, as you see here, okay? And I kind of want to feature a couple things. So this was the first section that I did with all these smaller seed beads in it, okay? And as I worked along, I realized that I wanted a bit of weight to my piece. But I like this, so I kept it. But you'll see the other portion that I used on this very long chain, I made it a little bit heavier, and I used more of the smoky quartz that I was using, and more of the teacup beads and berries and things like that. Made it just slightly chunkier, but you can see that it all works really well together, okay? And then in this other one, I had some very tiny peridot chips in my bead stash, and you can see I've got some round beads and some pip beads, and then of course some peanut or berry beads here. And then I just want to focus in on, you can see that I've, again, got the Miyuki spacers. And I just attached this to a tiny little chainmail portion so that you could see how it was going to be attached. But here at the beginning, you can see the French Bouillon that I'm going to show you along with the spacer beads. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is how to create the ends of this chain so that it's seamless with all the other parts. Okay. So I went ahead and I strung some Fireline already onto a needle, and I'm just using a size 10 beading needle. Really, you could use a big eye needle, you could use whatever kind of needle you want. Okay, so I'm starting to make a knot, and I'm gonna go 1, 2, and 3. So at least 3 turns, because I want a big chunky knot. Now, normally you don't want that in beading, but because we're using the spacer beads, that's going to solve a lot of my problems that I would normally have, okay? And I like the Zuron fiber cutters to use with all my Fireline needs. You can see, boom, okay, that just is the best cutter in the world. I highly recommend, if you're a seed beater, you use Fireline a lot, those are going to cut forever, and they're just great. Okay, so now you see I've got my big honking knot on the end of my string, and I'm just going to set the string aside. Now, I'm going to get out my bouillon. Now, this is a great big container of bouillon. You don't need to have a container this big. They also come in little clamshell packages, but I really like gunmetal, so I'm using a fairly large container with it. Okay, and I'm just gonna eyeball this. Now, I can bring in, if I want to, a little piece for measuring. Got this little card at the Bead and Button Show in my bag. I always keep the little rulers that I pick up at different places. Okay, so let's say I'm gonna make this about 5 millimeters long. Okay, I've been making them a little bit longer than I wanted them, so I'm gonna shorten this one up, see how it does. Okay, and then you're gonna need one for the other side. So French Bouillon, this is normally used with pearl knotting. Okay, so this, you do the ends of your silk thread passing through here, and this makes really nice ends. And I liked it so much that I thought, you know, I think this is a good way to incorporate into beadwork instead of using a wire guardian, which is kind of open and you could actually catch the thread, whereas this is a tube. Okay, so this is going to fold over as I pass through it. And so when I use these tubes, it's really nice because you're not going to see the thread. It's going to look like that area is metal. And like I said, it's going to fold over and create a little curve. But the only thing I would warn you is this is for single strand jewelry only. If you're doing multiple strands and you want to come back through that bullion, you're not going to be able to do that. Okay, so just be aware this is for single strand jewelry, and it's going to work great for our purposes today. Okay, so now we're ready with our French bullion, and you can see I have my thread here. So I'm just going to show you on the thread. I cut that back before, but here, let me make sure my knot is good and bunched up as much as it can be. I'm going to trim my thread down really pretty close, but you can see I'm still leaving a little tiny tail. And then I'm just going to burn that into the knot, okay, very gently. If you have a thread burner, you can use that. I was just always used to using a lighter, so either one will work. Okay, and what I'm going to do now, and this is the neat part, is I'm going to pick up one of these pieces of bullion. Okay, slide that on there, just like a bead. It's a little tube of wire, very thin wire wrapped around to form a tube. Okay, and then what we want to do is I want to stab my needle. See how I'm between the two threads that were created by that knot? Okay, so I stab my needle between there, and I'm going to pull it through and cinch everything up really close to the knot. Okay, and you can see there's still some thread here. I'm still pulling. This is thread, this is tube. I'm going to keep pulling. Okay, so my tube was real short this time, so you can see that makes just a nice little tiny loop. I could have made that loop bigger or smaller. It just really depends on you and the size that you prefer to work with. Okay, now you notice I've got this little nub of a knot here. So that's kind of ugly. We don't want that showing up in our beadwork. And that's where the Miyuki spacer bead comes in. Okay, so you'll notice with these beads, these are the 3mm Miyuki spacer, and you can see how huge these holes are, okay? And that's really gonna help me here because I think I'm gonna pick up 2 of these and I'm gonna be able to hide that knot underneath the bead or inside the hole. Okay, so you can see when it goes on, it's hanging off to the side. And what I want to do is just kind of feed the knot into the inside of the hole. Now this takes just a little bit of pushing and prodding, and you might need to use your needle to feed it inside. Okay, but now we're there. And you see I needed 2 because that knot's a little bit longer than just the one. Okay, so I am going to make sure it gets fed into that second hole before I move forward too. Okay, so now you can see that that's all tucked up inside. We're not going to be able to see that knot at all, even though it was big and wonky. But it was a really fast knot to create and a very easy knot to create. So now you can see I just put a random selection of beads out here. And, you know, to create this kind of chain, you know, we just want to create different pretty sections of randomness in it. Okay, So I'm gonna start feeding on. Now you're gonna feel real quickly, like I only have seed beads on here, that these are very, very lightweight as compared to, you know, the kind of weight and feel that we need. So that's where gemstones come in, and they're real handy at creating a whole bunch of weight. So although glass beads in some circumstances can feel very heavy, in this circumstance, you're gonna actually wanna make sure that you've got some small gemstones around to add some weight to your pieces. Okay, so now I'm just doing like, you know, triangle, seed, triangle, seed, triangle. And then I started with a peanut. So see, I'm just creating little runs of patterns for myself randomly. Once I have this little run, then I probably want to, you know, add another gemstone. So I'm probably going to be using, I just pulled out a few beads for you to see as a sample, but you probably want about 5 or 10, well, at least 5. I've got 5 here. So you probably want about 10 different kinds of beads. And the only rules I'll give you is that you probably want 1 or 2 gemstone shapes. And that's for the weight again. And then you want to make sure that none of these beads for this particular chain that we're doing are larger than about a 4mm bead. Now you can see in this one, I threw this this stone bead in here. You see I've got some pearls mixed in. You can see I've got these circles that I'm using down here, and then the peridot is providing me with a whole lot of weight as I go through. So I've got, you know, chips, spacers, berry beads. So this is a great way to use up extra beads that you have. So if you set them aside in little vignettes of color, then you'll have something great to work with. Okay, so this isn't nearly long enough, but I'm just for our purposes today, and you can see, you know, I've got a long stretch. So, you know, sometimes maybe 5 or 6 inches, maybe sometimes 10, maybe sometimes 12 inches, you know, just do little segments of these. And I'm gonna stomp right here with this one, and I wanna show you how to finish this, okay? So to finish, I want this to look a whole lot like the beginning, but I'm gonna add 1 extra bead into this to make it easier on myself. Okay, because the knot was our stopper on this side, and on the end, the first thing I know that I want to have is a couple of spacer beads. Okay, and that's just to make this end reflective of that end. But the other thing I want to do is I want to add one of these smaller beads. So I could either add this a size 8 triangle, a size 8 bead, or you know, I have this smaller seed bead to work with. So I'm going to stick something smaller on the very end as a stopper. So that kind of behaves like my knot did on the starting end. And then I am going to pick up my bouillon yet again. And of course I made sure that those were both the same size. So like I said, it doesn't really matter how long you want your bouillon to be. I could have made it 8mm instead of 4, and that'd be okay for it to be bigger, but I do want to make sure that each end mimics the other end. Okay, so I have that on. Okay, you can see that there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass back through, I think I'll go back through this seed bead that's on the end, and maybe 1 of the spacer beads. Now this string that's coming out, I want to pull this tight, and I want to make sure that my thread is tight. So I'm going to hold that in place, and I'm kind of just gently holding the bouillon while I'm doing this. Okay, and I'm going to pull that back through. Okay, and see how that creates our little metallic loop on the end, so it gives us a nice finished look. Now I like the spacer beads on this end too, just because it makes it really easy to make a knot that's going to be hidden down here. So I am going to get my needle to split between these beads. Now when I pulled this string over top of it, that made it so it was actually going through the loop. Usually I do that a little bit later, but in this case it was easier to grab it there. Okay, and oh, actually that did not create enough. When I did that, that did not go through the loop. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so see how I'm going around the thread, kind of holding this end piece down. I'm going to pull, create my loop, pass through the loop, and that's going to create a knot. And that knot is going to be sitting between these two spacer beads, so you're never going to see it. Okay, and then I can go down a couple more beads. What I want to look for is places where, so see how I went through 3 more beads. I went through a spacer, a size 8 bead, and then the little seed bead that's here. I think these are little hex cut beads. I keep just calling them seed beads, but these are either little hex cut or tube beads. But anyway, and let's do another knot, at least one more. You can do 2 or 3 knots, doesn't matter, just enough to make it really secure. So see, I'm going through after the tinier bead and ending up beside the little bit larger bead. And the reason I'm doing that is I know that once I put this knot on, okay, so I've got my loop, passing through the loop, creating the knot. Once I have this knot on, when I pull again, I'm going to be pulling that knot kind of inside this size 8 bead here, this size 8 triangle bead. So it's going to get pulled inside, you're not going to see it, and that's nice. So when you have larger holes in your beads, use that to your benefit. You know, you want to always be thinking when you're doing bead work, and you know, this is really super simple, just a single strand bead work, but you know, still you want to think about all these things as you go along. And the other thing I'm thinking is, you notice I pulled through and I came out of the peanut bead. The other thing I'm thinking right now is that this size 4 bead and this peanut bead are darker than the rest of the work. So if I'm going to end my thread, I think this is a good place to end it, because these dark greens are going to hide this black thread just a little bit better than what would have happened had I ended up, you know, between these triangle beads that are really light. Okay, so I'm going to grab my handy dandy Zurons again. I just love these. I can't even say enough good things about all the Zuron tools, but I was real unhappy cutting Fireline until I found these. So these are fantastic. Okay, and I'm just going to once again burn the end of this thread down. It's probably going to be stuck to that peanut bead now. Okay, and I have a perfect little length of beadwork that I can now add into my chain. Okay, so you can see, kind of glad I did that now in a contrasting color, so you can see now what you're looking at. So see that French Bouillon there, and see the spacer beads that we were using to tuck that inside. And then I used some teacup beads. I really like those because those act as kind of a bead cap and hide a lot of sins too. And over on the other end, and you can see I did my Bouillon bigger on this one, but you can see this was the finishing end because I've got the 2 spacers and the seed bead, and that seed bead helped hold my French Bouillon in place. So the spacer bead has such a big hole that the French Bouillon can sink inside of it. So that's why we like this smaller type seed bead on the end, to just make sure that when we pull this loop around that it pulls seamlessly. Okay, so you can see how pretty these are. You can just, the sky's the limits with this. It's so much fun. You can do something that's almost exclusively seed beaded with this, or you can, like I did, you know, link this to other chains. So I've got this link to a section that I made using wire, where I was wire wrapping and wire looping, and I linked it together with chainmail. And then it's also linked to my kit, which is also uses spacer beads and creates a beautiful small spiral chain that matches perfectly with this chain that we created, in making a very long necklace that has a lot of texture and interest to it, and really looks, you know, looks like something made by an artist, as opposed to being something super symmetrical. This has symmetry to it in the size, but the texture that gets created between having the beadwork and the chainmail and the wire work is something really nice that I hope you will enjoy, and have fun making this. Get out your bead stash, see what you've got, and have lots of fun. Thank you so much.